Where are we there with that conflict, would you say?
I think we've made more progress. Again, by the way, look, Tucker, I'm not just saying it. Every solution comes as a result of President Trump. And I don't get paid to say that. I say it because it is the absolute truth. Putin's got a huge respect for the president. And, you saw what happened in the Oval Office with Zelensky and the president, right?
Yes.
Disrespecting him is not a healthy way to have a good relationship.
The arrogance of small countries, it's like, get some perspective. I mean, come on. How can you imagine acting like that?
And they're dependent on us.
Oh, I know.
And we've been so good to them.
I know.
And I think but look, that's been corrected, and that's a really good thing. It got corrected, and
yes.
Hopefully we'll chalk it up to a misunderstanding, and we'll get to a peace solution here. But I believe that we have made more progress in Russia in this Russian-Ukraine conflict in the last 8 weeks than anyone thought we would ever make. I hear people describe this last conversation that the president had with President Putin as unsuccessful. It's preposterous, by the way. We talked throughout a 2-hour conversation about an ultimate ceasefire. And there are conditions that the Russians will need for an ultimate ceasefire, because an ultimate ceasefire is complicated. There's Kursk, where Ukrainian troops are surrounded, fact, and the Russians...
Kursk is within Russia.
Kursk is within Russia. The Russians have taken it back.
Yeah.
And they've got people trapped there, and the president doesn't want to see everybody getting killed. That's a significant battlefield condition that has to be dealt with. But on top of that...
Is that acknowledged? Like, I don't know if the New York Times is writing that story right now.
I think it gets lost a little bit. First of all, I think a lot of these newspaper stories they're agenda-driven.
Yes.
People start out saying, I support the Ukrainians, so I'm going to write the article in a certain way. Look, we want to... I want to see Ukraine come out of this okay. I want to see Russia come out of it okay. Again,
yes.
We're outcome-oriented. In this circumstance means that we need a deal that the Ukrainian people can live with. We have to sell it. There's going to be various Senate approvals that we may need here, and I mean that's the political system we're in. That we're going to want everybody to be, in some respect, satisfied. So we're going to want the Russians to be satisfied in some respect. We're going to want the Ukrainians to be satisfied in some respect. We're talking to the Europeans. When I say satisfied, feeling that we came out of this thing, okay, with a deal that everybody can live with. I think that we have moved Russia in ways that no one thought was possible. So in the last conversation, they agreed to an energy infrastructure ceasefire, which means Russia is not going to target Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and Ukraine will not target Russia's energy infrastructure. They've never talked about that before. Here we are talking about that. They've never talked about reinstituting the Black Sea moratorium on maritime hits. Ukraine firing on Russian ships, Russia firing on Ukrainian ships. Now we're down to, and that's going to be implemented over the next week or so. There's some details that need to be discussed, but that became a part of that conversation. That's big stuff, really big stuff. What's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is a 30-day ceasefire, during which time we discuss a permanent ceasefire. We're not far away from that, but a 30-day ceasefire is something where we have to figure out what all the battlefield conditions are, which is why I began with Kursk. But Kursk is just the beginning of it, because there's this 2,000-kilometer, that's 1,200 miles, this 2,000-kilometer border between Ukraine and Russia, where the Russian and Ukrainian troops are involved in, 50, 60, 70, maybe 80 firefights throughout this border with all kinds of different conditions. Putin asked me in the meeting, what should I do in a particular area where we have people surrounded and they don't want to give up? Do I kill them? How do I get them to give up? I'm happy not to kill everybody. I'm happy to get people to wave the white flag if I can get them to wave the white flag. And that one situation, Steve, this is Putin talking to me, is just one example of 70, 80, 90 different situations out there along this border, each one having different battlefield conditions, each one needing a separate conversation. That's what has to happen for a ceasefire, and yet we're talking about it. That's a big, big deal. Our technical teams are going to be meeting in Jeddah beginning Monday. That's a big deal. There's all kinds of good, positive talk coming out of Russia about their willingness to consider all of these different things. And Zelensky had a wonderful conversation with the president after the President Putin's conversation the next day. And I think that indicates that they've got some degree of flexibility in the way that they've been thinking about finishing up this conflict. So I am, not to sound like a forever optimist, but I am very, very optimistic that we're going to be able to bring the two sides together. We have narrowed the issues so considerably. So I'm optimistic.
So Russia, Putin, who's been in power 25 years, has been consistent for the whole duration of his presidency in one demand, which is that NATO stop encroaching on his borders, and specifically that Ukraine, which is the largest country that borders Russia, not be in NATO. And that is my understanding, my certainty is that still remains the central demand, period. No, Ukraine and NATO can't have peace without that. In the same way that Israel doesn't want Hamas in its border. They don't want that. Can the U.S. deliver that?
Well, first of all, I think the largest issue in that conflict are these so-called four regions: Donbass,
yes.
Crimea, the names
Lugansk, yeah.
Lugansk, and there's two others. They're Russian-speaking.
Yep.
There have been referendums where the overwhelming majority of the people have indicated that they want to be under Russian rule.
Yes.
I think that's the key issue in the conflict. So that's the first thing. That when that gets settled, and we're having very, very positive conversations.
And Russia controls that. In fact, some of those territories are now, from the Russian perspective, part of Russia.
Correct. That's correct. But this has always been the issue,
right?
And it's sort of no one wants to talk about it. That's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is there are constitutional issues within Ukraine as to what they can concede to with regard to giving up territory. The Russians are de facto in control of these territories.
Yes.
The question is, will they be? Will the world acknowledge that those are Russian territories? Will it end up? Can Zelensky survive politically if he acknowledges this? This is the central issue in the conflict. Absolutely that. On NATO, I think that Zelensky and he's got a right-hand guy, Yermak. I think that they've largely conceded that they are not going to be a member of NATO. There's been all kinds of talk about whether they could still have, quote unquote, what is called Article 5 protection,
right?
Which gives every NATO country has this Article 5 protection.
Yes.
And whether Ukraine could have that in some respect from the United States or European nations without being a member of NATO. And I think that's open for discussion. But I think it's accepted that Ukraine, and Russia, if there's going to be a peace deal, Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO. I think that's largely accepted.